Okay, here we are. All right. So, welcome everybody to Seas of Love. And today I'm actually also quickly checking before I start talking and find out that then it doesn't even work.
We're
Um,
live in the group. It's
we are,
broadcasting.
it's
Yeah,
worked.
yeah.
Okay. So, welcome everybody to She's of Love, and this is a very exciting episode because once again we have a new guest on, which is Eve E. White, or like your name is Eve, so I'll just refer to you as Eve. But yeah, I am always so excited when we have a new guest because we open up to another story and another person's wisdom. And I don't know, it's always just so exciting. So thank you so much, Eve, for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So I'll open how I always open, and that is, what is your awakening story? And kind of it's a big question. So feel free to take this in any direction that you feel comfortable in, and any direction you feel called to share. Because we leave it very open and very broad, so it gives you as much of a chance to share how much or how little you want to share, and we'll just carry on the conversation from there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Uh, so I feel like, an awakening is like a constant journey.
Mm,
Um, I guess for me, there have been many points in that journey. Uh, and when I look back after delving deep into sort of uncovering all the inversions that I was brought into, or that I chose to come through into, I feel like when I was about 8, I completely lost faith, I guess you could say, or belief within like the Catholic religion.
mm,
Um, Being sort of brought up by my mother was sort of, I guess, more atheist than anything else, but she was brought up sort of 7-day Adventist. So a very sort of strict upbringing for her, and as an Aboriginal woman, um, not having embraced that culture because her father was kicked out of home when he was 12.
mm,
When he was 12, sorry. And he kind of lost connection with his mother, who was Aboriginal. Um,
yeah.
there was sort of no cultural wisdom passed on to mum in the physical. And then my father is also Aboriginal, but his father passed away young, and sort of would pretend he was Maori so that he could move through Australia with a little more ease. And so that was disconnected from my dad. So he was Catholic. Anyway, when I was 8, he my mom wouldn't have any like alcohol, or she never swore and never wore makeup, was very brought up in that way. And so my dad would go to the garage and drink, and then he went out to get them takeaway food, and came back drunk. And I answered the door, and he was like, where's your mother? And he was with the police, and he had um, smashed into my primary school at that time. And so the next day, my mother drove us to church, and that was, that whole confessing of the sin. And at that
Mm,
point, at 8, I was like, "Oh, this doesn't make any sense. Like, what's going on here?" And then at in that within that same kind of timeline, I didn't like my very Catholic teacher, and then also the priest. I was like, he just didn't look right to me. And so
mm,
at that age, I decided that that was just, even not knowing anything, just feeling and just witnessing from a child's perspective. Um, and I guess from there, I moved out of home really young, because I wanted my freedom. And I was living with hippies in Bondi, where I am right now, on Gadigal land. And was living with an Aboriginal guy who would share stories with me and give like didgeridoo massage, and then the other people I was living with was like, yeah, when you die, your soul goes like into a room and you like get a cup and you scoop that cup out and that makes another body. And then went and did the Vipassana meditation course where I did my year 12 personal interest project on. And so went back there and worked and just had that whole like um, time to relook at my whole life and all the things that I'd done wrong leading up to then. Um, but, you know, from there, I would drink spirulina shots and go out rather than like, you know,
Yeah.
rather than like delving into all the other sort of narcotics that are very filled in your life at that time, like is very, you know, what everyone tended to do. So I guess for me that was like just having that at a young age, and then meeting my husband when I was 21 and we read the book Conversations with God. um, when we met, like we I had a flatmate that I was sharing a room with, so our intimacy was to be laying down reading that book. And he also had a similar journey where he was left home young and hung out with hippies and, you know, was awoken to a lot of things. So fast forward after having a couple of children and then meeting a dear friend of mine who journeyed with me through learning yoga and qigong, and meeting her, and she was very health aware and health conscious. And I'd been put on the Fit for Life diet when I was like a very young child, and my mum was very healthy because she'd grown up with her mother who would give her boiled sweets and would book her children in at the age of 14 to get their teeth pulled out so that she didn't have to pay for dental work, because it was a very like came from like a lot of poverty, and that's just what you would do then. My mom chose not to do that. She doesn't have great teeth now, but she kind of at a young age came into her health. But what I realized when I met this friend who studied yoga with me, that there is so many layers to health. And, you know, yes, you might be healthy, but you still drink tap water and don't eat your organic food because you don't quite know why that is. You know, you don't have that understanding of why you would do that. And so she sort of opened my eyes up to that. And that was in 2012 when, you know, now I guess having seen these different timelines that happen and these different like waves of consciousness that come through, that was like kind of a time when that sort of happened in
Yeah.
2012. And
Yeah.
we got introduced to this woman, Heather Tucci, who like I guess that was my first time I started to listen to like podcasts and listen to that real unraveling of what I thought I knew. And she was talking about how her and a group of people were taking the federal banks to court and that they weren't showing up, and so they literally took down the Federal Reserve Bank in that time in 2012. And the way that she was talking and what she was talking about was just so like just so eye-opening for me. And there was a lot of things that were coming into the sphere then, you know, with the internet and the uncovering of a lot of things. And um, from there, the trajectory sort of went into like flat Earth and that
Mhm.
kind of scenario. And it was like that was kind of put out on purpose to make those of us that were really starting to see the truth look a bit crazy, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah.
And so then within that 2012 scenario, I realized that I had, um, when I had my first child, I didn't want to give him any of the childhood vaccines.
Mhm.
But it was so much pressure to do it. And it was so, you know, like he won't be able to go to like, you know, school. He won't be able to be cared for. You won't get like the money. You know, my family was, you know, a bit like funny about it. My husband's family as well. And so we kind of put it off, but then we ended up giving him a certain amount of those vaccines. And we weren't aware at the time that that had given him, like, he got bronchiolitis and then hospital and then diagnosed with asthma. And we had another, and then we sort of stopped at like 4.
Mhm.
um, and we didn't realize that then, that that was all a knock-on effect. And we had our
Yeah.
daughter, and we also waited a while for her. We didn't give her everything, but she had a few things, and then she also got hospitalized with asthma and got eczema. And then my husband also has chronic asthma, and so we realized in this 2012 timeline that that had also, his vaccines at 3 had given him asthma, and it was never
Mhm.
in his family. He's Jamaican. His family came from Jamaica to London, and he was the first one in his family that got asthma, because in Jamaica they weren't giving them those vaccines back then. He's like 55 now. And so with our third child, we were like super empowered to, not like, no, none of those vaccines would come into any of our bodies. We were so strong with that. And I didn't realize that just because I knew all of this, and I'd come to this awakening, that when my third child, I had him, and I actually had him just like around the corner on the street in Bondi accidentally. I didn't quite make it to
Wow.
the hospital. He just kind of, I'd like looked into birthing. What was it called? There's a DVD. It's like really old, and it goes in on like birthing in the Dead Sea and turning pain into pleasure.
Mhm.
And like my first birth, I was like, everyone does this, it's something that all women do. I didn't really look into anything, and just was like climbing that mountainous journey for 26 hours in a very unrelaxed way. And then my daughter, I kind of looked a little bit more into that and labored really nicely. But then for my third, I was like, okay, switching pain to pleasure. And I really felt like I did that in the labor. Um, I allowed myself just to be held and be massaged by the women. And I was like, I don't have to do the dishes. I can just like, be held and, feel really nurtured. And then I guess that's, how I didn't quite make it to the hospital. Thankfully, he was born underneath the moon, next to the rosemary bush and the lavender bush. And then I kept his
Wow.
placenta. Yeah. So I kept him attached to his placenta, because I'd learned about lotus birthing and the technology of that placenta, which is seen as the grandmother in Aboriginal culture of the baby. And it's the firstborn. It's where the name, the our actual name that's on our birth certificate is the placenta. It's that whole paper trail, the death certificate, not the birth certificate. And the severing of that as soon as they're born, and that disconnection, that you don't then get the stem cells setting your body up for the environment that you're born into,
Mhm.
and giving you all of that wisdom that that organ holds for you as it connects with your environment. So I kept it attached for him overnight. Um, we did go to the hospital just because that's where we were going. And so we did call the ambulance, and they came and just laughed at us because we were all laughing on the ground and like with this baby. And went there, and it was like 9 o'clock I had him. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, finally someone came to see us, because there were so many sick babies in the hospital. And we were fine. And so just then went and left and came home. And so with him, I didn't, vaccinate him. And then when he turned 1, I wrote this like birthday post on like Instagram. And I just tagged like my family in the picture. I didn't realize I was going to write this trajectory of like his journey through seeing his immune system, and how he didn't get sick in that year. He didn't get anything that the others got, and how I had given them the vaccines. And then I tagged my family, and it was like such an uproar for my family. How dare you troll my name in your anti vax post? And I was like, whoa. because I didn't actually mean to go on that tangent, and I didn't
Yeah.
register that that was something that was so, you know, shamed back then. Um, and so I, you know, my children all know that I openly speak about this, and you know, fast forward to like 2020 when all of a sudden the whole, you know, planet's in lockdown and there's this, you know,
Mm.
vaccine that's something that we've never seen before. And I knew how a lot of people would feel then because I felt the same way. Like, you know, I felt the same pressure back when I had my first child, and there was that pressure to get the vaccine, and having, you know, journeyed through that and seeing it with my own eyes. I've got a child that's 19 and I've got a child that's 2 now with same
Wow.
parents, same, you know, everything the same except. And I have done, you know, the children have done detoxes and they're not on preventatives for the asthma. My husband did, however, um, I have had to take him to hospital many times, and in 2021, I got this like download that I needed to leave this Bondi area. It was like a really strong, you need to leave, you need to go up north. And so we
Yeah.
packed up our whole family house, five of us then, and my husband had just had an asthma attack, like just before we packed up the house. And so we took him to hospital, and they had him in a perspex room. And because he wouldn't get tested, because we knew about the vaccines, but when we discovered about the PCR tests, I was like, wow, this is something we've never seen before. This testing, like you don't get tested mass all the time, you know. And then seeing that video of that guy that created the test, and
Yeah.
now he's not with us, right? But that video didn't last very long. It was a very short time that you could access it and see it, and that was really scary. Like, you know, about the tagging and the putting it up into the pineal
Yeah.
gland and
Yeah.
ancient Egyptian scenario. Um, and so he wouldn't get tested in the hospital. They sent like 12 people into the room, and every time they went in there, they had to completely hazmat suit themselves up, mask themselves. It took them 5 minutes, you know. And he's got asthma, and they just were trying to coerce him into getting it. And so he ended up leaving. Out of doctor's orders, like they'd given him the oxygen and the magnesium, so it kind of helped him a bit. Packed up the whole house, which was dusty. So I sent him away, and I packed up the whole house myself. And then we ended up getting a place. Our friend was up north, and she found a place she couldn't find anywhere in the northern rivers. She found somewhere in Mermaid Waters,
Mm.
and somewhere where I'd never been before. Great house, had a pool. I was like, yeah, okay, let's go. So got in the car, got a truck, and that was the day after New South Wales was declared a hotspot. So we
Mm.
got a pass, and we're like, let's just go to my friend's house in Ballina and regroup, and went there, and then decided we would leave the car, um, and walk across the border because it was that whole border scenario. And so we left the car, walked across the border.
That's
The whole
crazy. That's so
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, and it was my son's 16th birthday, and I was like, okay, we're gonna like walk the song line, we're gonna do this pilgrimage, you know, this is just what we're gonna do because my
Mm.
husband wasn't quite like, you know, recovered. So I
Mm.
just didn't want the stress of anything. I didn't want to go to hotel quarantine, which is what I was meant to do, right?
Yeah.
And so we get to Mermaid Waters, and then a week and a half later, he had the craziest asthma attack. He was banging on the table. He asked me for the paramedics, which he'd never done before in the 20 years I had known him. I always had to force him to the hospital with his asthma.
Mm.
And so they came, and then I had to tell them that we'd come from Sydney, and then it was like complete, you know, panic attack for them, and they hazmasked themselves up, and gave him like 6 shots of adrenaline, which was so much that by the time they got him onto the table, out the door, because the stretcher wouldn't fit inside the door. It took a while, and hooked him up to the ambulance. He was flatlining. And so they defibrillated him twice and brought
Oh
him
my
back.
God.
And it was actually this guy, I don't know where he came from, but he was like in a different paramedic uniform. He just came out of nowhere, and he was the one that sort of brought him back. And then I traveled with them in the ambulance, and my kids were with my friend. And then when we got to emergency, everyone was really nice to me until they presented the PCR test, and I was like, I'd like to see the packet, and I'd like to see what it's made out of. And they were like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Well, it would come in a plastic covering. It would tell you what's on it."
Mm.
Um, and then they're like, "Oh no, we can't do that." I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to put that in my body. I refuse
What?
to." And so then
Like
they
you
quarantined.
go to the grocery store and you buy like whatever you buy, you're legally allowed to know what is in it. Like that's crazy.
Exactly. Mm.
Oh, sorry.
But I mean, meanwhile, my husband's like fighting for his life, right?
Mm,
So, um, and so as soon as I refused that, they quarantined off the room, and
okay.
all of the doctors left, and it was just like these young nurses running around going to the hole to get things that, because he was still struggling, and they were cutting like his clothes off, and they were asking me what he's allergic to, and I was like, ethylene oxide and graphene oxide, and they're like, what's that? And I'm like, well, you're a doctor, you should know, look it up. But that's what he's allergic to. Don't give him a PCR test. He's allergic to it. It's a carcinogen. Da 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 da. You know the whole thing. Um,
Yeah.
and then um, they put him on life support and intubated him. And then I could see in the other room that there was all police and other people there. And then they took him away without my knowing, and then sent the police in to interrogate me, um, and couldn't, because I'd turned off. So I turned off location services on my phone. I was paying cash, like you couldn't trace me, and they were really confused by that. They couldn't work out how to change the settings on my phone. Um, and so an hour later, they, came back in, and finally, like it's 1 o'clock in the morning by now, and they took me outside. Um, there was like a group of people in like kind of like sports uniforms, like matching like maroon and blue sport uniforms. And I was like, what are they doing? And they're like, oh, they're strategizing. I was like, okay, at 1 o'clock in the morning. And then they're like, well, you have to go in the back of the paddy wagon because it's the most sanitized place. We're taking you home. We would take you straight to hotel quarantine. But because you have children and it's really late at night, we'll surveil your house overnight, and then we'll come and get you first thing in the morning. And so um, I went home, and then in the morning when I didn't wake up, I called the hospital, and they said that I had to create a code word because the media had caught wind of the story, and they were calling up acting like they were me. And so I created a code word, and then they
I'm s- this is
yeah,
the most
it's
insane story.
crazy. I actually wrote a chapter in a book of this story. Um,
That's
yeah,
yeah, it deserves a book on
it
it's like yeah.
And
Wow.
it's because I went deep in 2020 about, and I went deep down all of the different holes, and
Mm,
like learning about like where they put hospitals, and how they put a
mm,
cemetery next to the hospital, and how everything's like I learn about all the deep underground military bases, and the child trafficking, and the
mm,
what they do in the hospital, like all of that. So like for us to step into that space was really needed, because he was dying, like he died, right?
mm,
um and we learn about the 5G and all of that, and in that area it was so full on, the towers that were in that area where we moved to, which sucks the oxygen out of the air, and like so we knew all of that, like we
yeah,
and for us to step into that space, into like that sort of front line, knowing what we know and still being really strong with where we stood with it. Like, I'm
yeah,
not going to put that up my nose even though I know my husband is there, like, you know, I'm still going
Mm,
to defend his right to not put it up his nose when he's like,
mm,
you know, like, so we were very aware of all of that. And so it was very interesting how we ended up in that scenario. So then the police call me and they're like, oh, just so you know, we're surveilling your house. What's your plan? And I was like, well, I'm going to just continue to pray for my husband's life. He's on life support. He's in a coma. Um, you know, I'm not going anywhere. I'll continue to self isolate. And then they hung up. And so that night, the same time that he had had his attack and we'd called the ambulance, I get a knock at the door. And it was like three different dressed, like there was like a policeman, there was like a rescue looking guy, and then there was like an army looking guy. There was like a black cop, and they knocked at the door and they read me my directions, and I was like, okay, so what's your name? You know, under who's who are these orders coming from? And they're like, it's from higher above. And I was like, will you have your higher above call me? And I like closed the door, slammed the door in their face.
yeah.
Like, I'd been driving around prior to this for a year without a license, wanting to have a conversation with a policeman so I could practice my common law speak that I'd been learning, you know? So
Mhm.
I was kind of in that like mindset. Um, anyway, I went and hid in a cupboard, and then they continued to like try and knock the door down. And then I get a call from the health officials saying, because you've been here for this amount of time, you only need to go to quarantine for 3 days. I said, what will they do if I don't go? They will force you, they will knock the door down, da 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 da. So I was like, okay, we'll go. So then the black cop comes over to me and he's like, because I was speaking a certain way, they knew like, you know, they know your type, right? When they hear you
Mm.
speak. And he's like, look, I'm on your side. I wouldn't get vaccinated. Um, if you come with us now, I'll arrange for you to go and see your husband in hospital, like to get an exemption. Um, and then he's like, oh, I'm Aboriginal. And I was like, oh yeah, where are you from? Like, where's your mob from? And he's like, oh, up north, but I've been living in Canada. I was like, well, what's the name of your mob? He's like, oh, I don't know. um I've been living, and I was like, like, really, like, have you later on I was like, he was totally put there to whatever, I don't know, to butter me up, to having probably looked at who I was and where I was from and whatnot. So it was all very bizarre. And then they put me and my youngest child in one ambulance, and then they put my older two kids in another ambulance because that's the most sanitized place for us, dangerous people that have not quarantined. And they took us to the hotel, Broadbeach Sofitel, and took us down into the, like, when we got there, there was like all these people waiting for us. And like when they came to my door at my house, there was like ambulances, police. It was like a circus. Um, and so they took us down to the basement, read my directions, showed me how much I was going to have to pay, which was like $8,000 or whatever. Laughed in my face when I said I was there for 3 days. Like, no one comes here for 3 days, it's always 14. And then, sent me upstairs. Um, and the next day, my mum called me and she's like, oh, did you see the news? And I was like, Mum, I don't watch the news. And then
Mm.
she was like, well, you were on the first story of Channel 9 News. Family illegally crosses the border. So they filmed us undercover getting taken out of the house, recreating the scene from the night before like it had just happened. So that's why there was all the circus there. Like, he just had the attack. Family illegally crosses the
Oh
border.
my, oh my
Husband
God.
husband has a cardiac arrest. They put the paramedics' lives in danger. And then they interviewed the street that we just moved into. How dare they come to our street and bring COVID to our street? So when I called the hospital, they told me that they tested him 3 times and that it had come back negative all 3 times.
There you go.
Yeah. Um, and so
So they
then,
so that basically was assault because you had
yeah,
asked them not to do it.
yeah,
So you
yeah.
said to them that
They
you're
even
allergic
written
to
it
the
down.
test. Far out.
Wait, they
Yeah.
tested him with the
Yeah.
CR test.
they didn't
Yeah.
even do a blood.
No.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Oh
because
my
when he
God.
was in the hospital in Sydney, he had said, I'll spit for you,
Mhm.
like I'll give you my spit, but I'm not putting that in my body. But they refused that. And then so like I think it was so what I was doing, I had like a team of people, like this one guy in particular who had worked with Steve and done like, his name's Kent Tian Healing. He's in Kirribilli, and he has like the Tesla 0 point heart machine. And he's a bit of a wizard, like in what he does. And so I was calling him, and he was going in through the quantum and doing the Rife technology on him. And so I remember on the Lions Gate, I had other friends who were also like helping, and he's got like lots of family in the UK and big family there. And so on the Lions Gate, I went in on a meditation, and I could see that it was like he was on like a bed of golden light, and there was all these like wizards, like all these working on him, like helping him. And so the next day he came out of his coma and woke up. And so I had his mother like, don't let him come out of hospital. He's going to want to come out of hospital. Um, and I thought they were all helping him. Like I was calling up and they were letting us talk to him while he was in a coma. Like the kids were talking to him. But then as soon as he woke up, it was like I couldn't call up anymore. They were like, he's got his phone. He didn't use his phone very much. Sometimes he would text me, and I didn't realize that they weren't like helping him. And all of a sudden, a day later, he messages me saying, I'm coming to the hotel. I was like, what do you mean? You've just come out of a coma. You can't, like, you're not well enough, to come back. Um, and then I didn't hear, and then he goes, ask the hotel. So I called the hotel, and they were like, yeah, Stephen White's coming. And I was like, is he coming to my room? And they're like, we can't tell you that. I was like, what is going on? And so at 11 o'clock that night, I get a knock at the door, and there's this big army guy with a wheelchair, and Steve's in the wheelchair, like gray, bent over. He couldn't stand up. He couldn't walk. He was like half dead. Um, and so I had to lift him up and carry him in, and then all night carry him to the bathroom because he just had the catheter taken out. And then he was like, he had to cover his whole body up with a sheet because he felt like he had these. So he said he had, like, when he came out of the coma, as he was coming out, there was like this Batman like machine that had these threads that were coming down on his body, and that when they weren't touching his body, the thread was blue, but then when they were touching his body, the thread was red, and it was like his blood was getting taken up to the ceiling. And then he went back, he passed back out, and then when he woke up, he felt like he felt like the threads were still on him, so he had to cover himself up with the sheet, and he had to just make enough space so that he could breathe. And then every time a nurse came in the room, the pressure in the room would come off and he could breathe. And then every time they went out, the pressure went back on and he couldn't breathe, and he could hear a sound looping around because he refused to get tested, so they put him in the COVID ward. So when he woke up, and he could see that in the apple there was puncture marks, and in the water there was sediment. So he had one glass of water that was clear, and he was just sipping that, and he wasn't eating anything, drinking anything. He didn't go to sleep. He kept himself awake because he thought, like, he could see they were trying to knock him out so that they could test him and get that false positive. And in the hospital he could hear everyone coughing at the same time and the music being looped around. So when he came back, he was so traumatized. I had to turn all the Wi-Fi off. I had to take him to the shower and scrub his skin because he felt like the strings were on his skin. And then I found a string on him that was like a dog hair that was pointy at both ends. And I thought he was going mad, right?
Ooh,
So it wasn't
ooh.
until
Sorry, I'm like so invested. This is crazy.
it's a
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Um, and
He
so
found a
it took
hair on him.
yeah, it was like a long dog-like hair pointed on both sides, which I
Wow.
kept. I have no idea where it is now because when we so he came back and I managed to I had got my friend to bring my cold pressed juicer and my family was like, what do you want? I was like, I want an organic fruit box, and so I was juicing and I had him on like different other protocols that he was doing, and like he got back, he came good ish. um but what we realized later is that they'd given him like no discharge letters. They'd given him the wrong preventer. They'd given him a child preventer. So his asthma kind of never, like, he still kind of struggles a little bit now from that experience. Um, and then we had to spend 3 weeks in the hotel because we wouldn't get tested. So they send people into the hotel quarantine and test you. I think 3 times, and definitely before you leave. And because we wouldn't get tested, they kept us another week. And the real estate sent me that news clip, and they said you have to fumigate the house and you have to send us all a negative test, otherwise you'll be evicted. And so we just chose to be evicted. And so by the time we got out of the hotel, which was actually a nice experience, especially for Steve, he felt like he was in heaven when he came there because of what happened to him in hospital, being sort of tortured in that way. And we had 2 adjoining rooms and the broad beach, 2 balconies that had sun for like 2 hours in the morning. So I made everyone get up early so they could get into the sun. My teenagers were hating me. And then, so we got out, we had one day to move out of the house that we just moved into. And he wanted to go up north. We had friends buying a boat and wanting to like leave Australia at that point. So we're like, okay, let's stay with Corinne, who you had on one time on your show, who introduced me to you. So we camped out at her house for 6 weeks until we could get a bigger car, because in this process I found out I was pregnant with my fourth. Um, and so we needed another seat in the car. So we got a bigger car, got tents, and then just drove up to Cairns, camped on our way, camped on this beach, Ellis Beach, for like a month, which you could have your tent and then there was the beach, just you'd open up the tent and there was like, you'd go for a walk on the beach and you'd find like mangoes um, all over the beach. So we spent like a month there, and then we went to the Daintree to visit some other friends, and I just got really hot and we were looking for places to live as we were going, but because we were evicted, we got blacklisted. And
Oh.
so no one would accept any of our, like to rent anywhere. So I got another calling that I needed to go down north to the Northern Rivers. And so we went, and then that was December December 2021, and we were there like a week, and then I think it was Christmas Eve or the day before Christmas Eve our car stopped working. And so we're in tents, right? And this is December 2021 in the Northern Rivers. Was like, it didn't stop raining. It was raining and
Mm.
raining
I
and
remember
raining
this. Wasn't it
and
really
raining.
bad floods almost?
It
Like,
was the 2022 flood, the big flood that they had there.
oh God.
And so we had a friend staying at Mount Warning Rainforest Park, which is
Mm.
Wollumben, the base of Wollumben, the sacred mountain. And she's like, they give families cabins that are in need. You should come here. So we landed there. Someone gave us like a 5-room tent, which then we landed there. Our car stopped working. Our tent got flooded. Um, and I was very pregnant. And 2 years prior to that, I'd had this vision in my bath that I was birthing in this creek surrounded by the ancestors, and I was showing a new way of birthing. So I never was really ready for one child, let alone having a fourth child. So it wasn't in my sphere. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. What does that mean? So when I arrived in Mount Warning or Wollumben and I went into that creek, I was like, oh no, is this where I'm going to birth this baby? Is this what's happening?
Mm,
Um, and so, yeah, then we got flooded out of the tent, and the owner put us in a little riverside cabin just before the flood came. And our car was at the mechanic. So we had 5 of us living where there was no signal, in a tent, no car. I was pregnant, and I was like, wow, this is rock bottom. This is what they say, right? You hit rock bottom. Anyway, so we're in this little riverside cabin, and then the flood came, and the little creek turned into a huge mountainous ocean, and all you could hear for 24 hours was like big boulders flying down the mountain. And
mm,
so um, we couldn't no one could leave the park for 3 weeks. And at this
mm,
stage I was like probably about 32 weeks pregnant. um, and then, yeah, then our car was at the mechanic, and the flood took the car um, completely under. The mechanic went completely underwater at Yukai. It happens there, like did it happen there in 2017. And then no one could drive out of the park, so we were like, okay, everyone's on out, like everyone's like where we've been at, this. And it was
mm.
kind of fun because, like, the boys all went off in a boat because it was like an island, and you couldn't, like, they went off in the boat to get food, and my son went with them. And someone made like food at the park, and everyone came and had some of the food. People were bringing food because I was pregnant. People were leaving like piles of nappies on my balcony, and the owner of the park moved me into a little eco cabin. I was teaching yoga there, and she heard our story. She's like, oh, here, stay in this cabin, it'll be more comfortable, while you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And then yeah, and then eventually, yeah, we got out of the park, and the didn't leave the park. We were still living there, and our neighbor gave us a car, like a 7-seater car that she didn't need, and she said, just pay what you can when you can.
Wow.
And then we still couldn't find a place, and so my husband had to go to Sydney for work, and he took the boys, and my daughter stayed with me, and I had the women over for a little blessing way. And then they left at 10 o'clock at night, and then at 7 o'clock in the morning I woke up and I was like, oh, it's happening. And this is like 5 weeks early, so I was 35 weeks pregnant. And my husband managed to come half an hour after I birthed him, um, and kept the placenta attached to him for 2 days. And he didn't feed from me, really. He didn't pull my milk down until I severed the placenta.
Mhm.
And then he fed. So it was like he was premature. 5 weeks is premature. And he was just like with his little natural incubator, keeping him,
Yeah.
just supporting him through that. And it was just so magical to see that, and to see the power of that, and to see myself heal naturally. When I birth, I tear, but I always thought I had to get sutured up. But this time I didn't, and it just felt so amazing to heal naturally. It felt like I could go to the toilet more easy. I had women making me like herbal douches and to help knit me back up. Um, so, and then I had one visit with the hospital I'd booked in, just so that they knew that I was about to birth, because it was pretty much free birth apart from that. And I'd booked in to go see them the next day. And then I'd had the baby prior, so I emailed them going, look, I don't need to come in, I've had the baby. And because he was 5 weeks early, they sent an ambulance. And the ambulance came, and they didn't come into the cabin. I was just sat at the table feeding him, and I was like, look, we're fine. But sure enough, they send me the bill for that ambulance, even though I didn't order it. Or, it's crazy, right?
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
I
that's
didn't
Like,
use
great.
it. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, so
it's so wild to me that like these, you know, these people and these like companies, I'll call them, because hospitals really are companies at the end of the day. Like they're praised, and um especially during COVID time, like how you mentioned your family were like your husband's family were like, keep him in the hospital after
mm,
seeing and hearing like what he was going through. Like that would be the
yeah.
last thing I would want. And
Yeah.
yeah, they
And
just, It's crazy.
Totally. And even though you might hear these things and hear of them, you know, like in this journey of awakening, it's really important to be super discerning with how you do that, with
Yeah.
how you even share some truths with people that are so
Mm.
dark and so intense for a beautiful soul to hear, that we need to be really mindful to do it in a way where we can, like I'm a yoga teacher, so when you teach yoga, it's like you're opening people up. But if you don't close back up properly and like finish in complete rest and, you know, bring people back really mindfully and gently, you're opening up to these other places that can travel into your heart. You know, the heart opens to good and to bad. And when we
Yeah.
learn the bad, we can keep that and not, you know, and so when, you know, even though we were learning about like hospitals and that whole scenario, you still, when you've got asthma, like it's such a tricky thing because it's been created almost, I think, by the toxins that you get subjected to in these vaccines. And you know, the lungs kind of um, shuts down
Yeah.
because of the toxins. And then if you know, open it up unnaturally with Ventolin, it will always need to get that. You know, when you given the steroid, the preventer, you get addicted to it, and so your lungs fill with liquid when you don't have it. You know,
Mm.
so like the sometimes like what I've found, like asthma's no joke. If you can't breathe, you can't breathe, and that's where we need sometimes this outward help.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, and so in that time, even though he kind of needed that help because there was that other agenda going on, it was just like another COVID number, you know, just another story, another scare tactic. um it wasn't, you know, it wasn't helping him. It was, you know, was doing the
Yeah.
opposite. Like he's lucky to have come out of there. If he didn't have us and didn't have that outer, like that quantum help that he received, and the love, and because there was a black nurse from his area in London that
Mm.
got him out. She called the ambulance for him, you know, she got him out. If that, and yeah, and he was like always very gracious with everyone, always really loving with everyone, even though there was some really horrible, like he can only describe them as reptilian like nurses that were in there.
Yeah.
Um,
I was
Definitely.
going to say, like, that was part of when you were talking about everything that you went through. I was thinking
mm,
to myself, this whole time you're experiencing all of that, your husband's in the hospital. And I was thinking to myself, what are they doing to him when he's in the hospital? Because he's vulnerable. He's there because he can't breathe. So it's not
mm,
like he can fight them, like fight for himself or advocate for himself, because he doesn't have you there. They
yeah,
separated from him. And
yeah,
so the whole time you were telling that story, I'm thinking, what's happening to your husband? And the thought that, because I was thinking to myself, how does a person come in for a completely unrelated issue to COVID? Like he doesn't
mm,
have COVID, he has asthma. How does he come into the hospital and they turn it into a circus about COVID, and
mm,
they
Yeah.
switch the spotlight from
And he doesn't even have
saving your
COVID.
husband?
He doesn't
Yeah,
even have
no,
it.
no,
Like
no,
it's
that's right.
insane.
So they switch the spotlight from helping your husband to
Mm.
imprisoning you into the hotel. Like it's just it's doesn't it for a person who's raised to think that hospitals and nurses and doctors are there to help you.
mm,
The story makes it's like something out of a movie,
Mm.
because
mm.
these people are
And
not
with
helping you. They're
no,
they're
and totally, totally. And within that, there were like, you know, I could even see them when I was there. Like that one guy that came out of nowhere that helped him. when he got in the ambulance, he came to the emergency room out of nowhere when the emergency room was quarantined off, put his arm around my shoulder and said he's going to be okay. And I was like, and then he disappeared. And I was like
Like an angel.
even, yeah, totally. And like that woman, that nurse that got him out was like, it, and you see these people that are in these spaces, for a reason. Like, um, but yeah, anyway, it's been a journey, and we ended up getting a place a year after we spent that time living in that caravan park. We got somewhere in the private, and yeah, so that was, I guess that was like solidifying the like awakening journey I guess we'd been on, by showing us that yes, everything that you've looked into is what it is, because having experienced that firsthand, you're like, wow, okay.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's like so much to receive from that, and I first of all, thank you for sharing that and entertaining us all with that wild story. But I think there's just so much to delve into, like, and to receive, because um it really upsets me, like when I talk with people who are kind of on the more, I don't want to say asleep side because I don't like using that word, but like, on the more closed off side to themselves, and kind of shame those like us
Mm,
who choose a sovereign path. And it's, I don't know, I've talked to many people, especially people my age, because I'm 21. So I have a lot of friends who are very awake and very spiritual and very like on my side of things, but then I have a lot of friends who aren't, because I think I'm at that age where, people are learning and trying to figure out their own lives. And so, um, anyway, but I have many conversations where they try to gaslight our side of the argument. And stories like yours are the really important ones that show, like, no, this is a real thing, and this is how people are treated. And it's so not okay. Like, you're treated literally, when you were telling the story of how, like, you were in one ambulance with your youngest, and then your two oldest were in the other. It's like you're treated like animals. Like, that is being treated like a second class citizen. That is not how anyone should be treated. And it's real stuff that's happened, and it's crazy.
mm, mm.
Yeah, it's not okay. So, I
No.
mean, and also just power to you. I mean, like,
No.
I yeah, like that is a real
Yeah,
testament to
we were
power.
we were very staunch, and my older kids were like coming into like their teenage years,
Mm.
and like what I just remember when Angel, she she had a group of friends that they would all chat on something, and it was at that point where like their teachers had to be vaccinated, and then it was like those that age group was also getting that COVID vaccine, and one of them
Mhm.
was like, oh, you're not coming, you can't come to my house if you're not, and it
Yeah,
was it was like, this is why we took you from the city, because you know we could see that what was coming, that timeline that was happening, um, and everything that we'd been sharing with them, they finally were like, oh, Puff Diddy, whatever his name is, that whole
yeah,
conversation that's coming to light, which has already happened, like it's already come to light. It's like I'm watching an old B grade movie,
yeah.
um, but it's, yeah, we've been
And
living in the seven deadly sins. It's been promoted so heavily in,
yeah,
like, especially in my lifetime, and we forgot the virtues, and it's like we have to just go through all those seven deadly sins and
We
look at
forgot the
what that
virtue. So true. So
the
that is so
virtue.
true. What you've just said, we forgot the virtues. It's like I've started to remember the virtues over the past probably 2 months, maybe even 3 months now. Innocence, you know, the, saying something and upholding your word, all of those things, all of those virtues that we used to, because I'm 52, 53, all of those virtues that I was taught as a child by my parents. You know, when you say you're going to do something, you do it. And
Mm.
you, the word is your bond, and, you know, reputation, and, you know, doing the right thing and helping people and all of that stuff is kind of like now is frowned upon almost.
It's
People,
not cool. It's not
it's not
cool.
cool. Exactly.
But,
And
but yeah.
yeah, like it's come into my my complete front vision. Like it's right in front of me now, all of these
Yeah.
things. And it's the stark difference between the way I was raised and how people are being raised now, or how society praises action, is
Mm.
completely different. And it's like, to me, it's like, what's going on? Well, how are people not seeing that the way that they're acting is hurting other people and hurting themselves? How do
Totally.
they not see that?
And I guess now, like, now that everything's being like recorded on so many levels, as we start to come more into our awakening, we can see for ourselves what everyone's been doing, and how they've been showing up, and how, like, it's so revealing. And so
Yeah, it's
something that I
feeling.
just tapped into, which, like, when I was really researching a lot of things, and I think this teaching came from maybe Santos Bonacci, who then shared it with, like, there's a guy called Charlie Freak.
Oh,
Um,
yes. Yep.
yeah, and so and then because I'm doing this breathwork course right now, humanitas habilitation, um, where it's like a really expansive breathwork, and it brings all the teachings in. Um, so the so it's like the Bible is like this allegory for the human body and the human vessel, and what the human vessel, the magic of the human vessel. And so the pineal gland is like the father. It's like the Joseph that releases the honey, which is like the DMT, like the that sweet honey that goes into the pingali that crosses through the chakras. And then the pituitary gland, which is further in, is the mother, which is like Mary, which releases the milk, which comes into the ida, that also crosses with the pingali, the feminine and the masculine. And
Yeah.
then they come down to the seat of the soul, which is the perineum. And then to bring it all the way up into the hypothalamus gland, which is the secretion. So you got the melatonin, the honey, the serotonin, the milk, and then the dopamine, which is like our inner child, which is like the eye that's inside the center of the head. And that,
Yeah.
I guess, the Kundalini awakening that people feel like they receive. And just that father, mother, child, ABC, 1, 2, 3, you and me, baby, that someone brought into a beautiful, simple song. And that we're that at this time of the year, when it's the Christmas and the Christed light, and that Bethlehem and arriving back to Bethlehem is all within our body, and
Mm.
like everything's coming back to, we have so much focus on the outside and so much distraction that, to just come back into the inner workings of this body tree,
Mm.
this vessel that we have that has these magical secretions that keep us alive and connected with our God that's within us. Um, and so I'm just coming back to all those beautiful teachings through this breathwork course that I'm doing, so that I can teach this practice that I feel like, in this time right now, for us to just allow ourselves to lay down on the earth and to really be in our bodies and to receive, the wisdom that Mother Earth holds for us.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I love how, you know, when we learn about all these things, we then get reminded about them, and then to just really be able to embody them
Yeah.
Yeah.
daily.
I love
Wow.
that. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I think this is a really powerful place to complete um, the conversation today, but we would love to have you back on if you're
Yes,
willing
please.
to. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, like honestly, such a cool episode.
Mm.
So yeah, I feel so good. I feel so inspired somehow. Like I don't know, I feel like so lively. It's really late where I am now. I'm in Scotland at the moment, so
Oh,
it's like 10
amazing.
p.m. for me. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I feel like more awake than ever. Yeah,
Yay.
yeah. So, oh, thank you so much.
Yes,
Thanks for
thank you,
having
Eve,
me.
for coming on. Yes.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
and we'll definitely talk to you soon. And thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you next week. So, yeah. All right. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.